avionics to start. Clear prop! My previous video was of me selling my airplane Maggie. I did that for a number of reasons, but the biggest reason was that I wanted to focus a little bit more on cross-country flying. And while Maggie is a fantastic training airplane, she was a little lacking in the cross-country flying part. I'm in a couple of aviation-related groups on social media and stumbled upon a group of 3 people who co-owned a Cherokee 235 and were looking to take on an additional partner. Skipping to the end, I bought out one of the partners, and now I am a co-owner of this airplane, 9070 Whiskey, and I'm going to take you along on this flight to introduce you to her. The mission for this flight: log an instrument approach in actual conditions so that it can count towards my currency requirements. My instrument rating has certain requirements in order for me to stay legally current. Every 6 months, in actual conditions or simulated, I have to fly 6 instrument approaches, holding procedures, and intercept and track courses. I've found it difficult to find the right weather conditions that allow me to do actual approaches. So far, to maintain my currency, I've had to do all of the above in simulated conditions, which means that I need a safety pilot alongside me. Flying approaches in actual conditions can be tricky. In the summer, clouds usually also mean thunderstorms, which I don't want to fly in. And in the winter, clouds usually also mean freezing, which I don't want to fly in. Finding a day where the clouds are low enough, but not thunderstorms, and not freezing hasn't happened very often in my first year with my instrument rating. But today is one of those days. So that's what I'm hoping to accomplish. Log 1, maybe 2 approaches in actual conditions. Okay, let's take off.
Okay. Heading bug. And here we go. We are making power. Temperatures, pressures in the green. Airspeed's alive, that's 40. 50. 60. 70 and rotate.
The first thing I should say about this airplane is that she flies basically exactly the same as Maggie did. The airframe of this airplane is almost identical to Maggie, so flying her is very similar. There are a couple of small differences. In Maggie, I lifted off at 60 miles per hour. In this airplane, I wait until 70. In Maggie, my best rate of climb was 85 miles per hour. In this airplane, it's 100. So after I lift off, I pitch for 100 and start climbing. The climb rate in this airplane is well above 1,000 foot per minute. In Maggie, I'd only get about 500 foot per minute. A big part of the reason is that this airplane has a stronger engine. Maggie's engine was 150 horsepower, and this one is 235 horsepower.
Cherokee 70 Whiskey, contact on approach on 128.32, take flight.
128.32, thanks for help, 70 Whiskey.
Visibility 7, ceiling 4,600 broken, 6,000 overcast, temperature 182.16, altimeter 3001. Expect ILS approach runway 20, advise on initial contact, you have Bravo. Concord information, Bravo, time 2150 Zulu, wind calm, visibility 7, ceiling 4,600 broken, 6,000 overcast, temperature 182.16, altimeter 3001.
Charlotte approach, Cherokee 9070 Whiskey, runway heading just off Stanley County, 2,000, climbing 4,000.
So not only does this airplane climb faster, but she also cruises a lot faster. In Maggie, I felt lucky to get to 120 miles per hour in cruise. Usually it was closer to 110 to 115. In this airplane, I cruise at 145 to 150 miles per hour.
So pressure is still good, landing light stays on. We're going to activate the autopilot.
And right there is another thing this airplane has, an autopilot. I've just instructed it to fly the heading I'm on while I wait to hear back from ATC.
Charlotte approach, Cherokee 9070 Whiskey, just off Stanley County, 2,600, climbing 4,000, runway heading.
Cherokee 9070 Whiskey, Charlotte departure, how do you hear me now?
Loud and clear, 70 Whiskey.
70 Whiskey, you're ready to contact clear to MEATT and join the final approach course.
Direct to MEATT, 70 Whiskey.
I'm now configuring the approach into my GPS, and as soon as that's done, I'll activate the approach and tell the autopilot to start taking instructions on where to fly from the GPS. This turn is being done by the autopilot based on the flight plan in the GPS.
Okay, let's brief this approach here. Okay, this is the RNAV 20 into Concord. We have the weather in there. We are on with Charlotte approach. Next was going to be Tower, which is 13465. We're approaching our altitude here.
This autopilot can also manage climbs and descents for me, and as I get to the altitude, it levels the airplane, but I still have to manage the airplane's power. I'm pulling the RPMs back to about 2400 and then leaning and retrimming, which brings up an oddity about this particular Cherokee 235. Most of them have variable pitch propellers, but this airplane has a fixed pitch prop. All that means is that flying this airplane is very similar to flying Maggie, since she also had a fixed pitch prop.
Okay, so we are currently direct MEATT. We will fly to MEATT, turn left 287 to Limo, and then left 196, and we will follow the glide path down to runway 0. We're expecting mist. Mist approach is climb 3000 direct WEG T and on track 127 to locus and hold. Okay, send you to the panel. Okay, minimums here are going to be 1026, which will become 1040 for minimums. The missed approach is going to be climb 3000, so our missed approach altitude will be 3000. So once we get cleared, we're going to activate approach mode, which is right there.
Approach mode instructs the autopilot to look for the approach's vertical guidance from the GPS and fly it.
Number 9070 Whiskey, how will this approach terminate?
9070 Whiskey, I'd like to go mist and then head back to Stanley County for the RNAV 22 left.
Okay, thank you.
Back to this airplane's speed. Of course, flying faster comes at a cost. This airplane burns more gas than Maggie, but not as much as you might think. I'm flying about 30% faster for about 35% more fuel, which means that even though I'm using more fuel per hour, I'm flying fewer hours. I still end up using a bit more fuel, but not as much as you might expect. The airplane also carries a lot more. When Maggie had full fuel, I had 540 pounds left to use between pilot, passengers, baggage, and supplies that I keep in the airplane. Generally speaking, that meant it was difficult to put more than one other person in the airplane. This airplane with full fuel can carry 869 pounds. That's 329 pounds more than Maggie, which means it's pretty easy to put 4 adults in this airplane to go somewhere. So let's talk about the avionics in this airplane. For my non-pilot friends, avionics are the gauges and instruments that I use to fly and navigate. Maggie had what's called a 6-pack. All of her instrumentation is mechanical. In this airplane, all of the mechanical instruments have been put into 2 electronic instruments called Garmin G5s. The top one looks like this and shows attitude, airspeed, altitude, vertical speed, and rate of turn. The bottom one looks like this and shows heading and course deviation. This makes instrument flying a lot easier because it reduces the number of places I have to look in order to safely fly the airplane. Essentially, it reduces my workload. Maggie did have a very nice GPS. This airplane has basically the same GPS but with a built-in transponder, which Maggie had as a separate device. But the biggest difference between the avionics in Maggie and this airplane is the autopilot. Prior to flying this airplane, I never used an autopilot before, and what a difference it makes. Now, to be certain, it also requires training and practice to be proficient. An autopilot does not replace the pilot, but it can do a few things to make flying a little bit easier. The pilot still has to learn how to tell the autopilot what to do, and how to confirm that the autopilot is doing exactly what was asked to do. An autopilot also introduces risk. A pilot can become dependent on it and lose their ability to hand fly the airplane. Since flying with the autopilot, I've had instances where I did not understand what it was doing, which then required me to disable the autopilot and hand fly until I could figure it out. I've also started seeing instances where my hand flying skills weren't as sharp as I'd like them to be, so I've started introducing full flights or parts of longer flights where I force myself to hand fly for an hour or so that I don't lose those skills. This flight was not one of those flights. This one was almost entirely flown with autopilot. On this particular flight, I'm doing an approach in instrument conditions that will, hopefully, count for currency. I want the additional safety margin that having an autopilot provides in those conditions. However, I'm closely monitoring the autopilot in case it starts doing something I don't expect and I need to hand fly. Skipping ahead, I'm cleared on the approach and I've completed my descent and GUMPS checklists. I've armed approach mode on the autopilot, which will shortly turn me onto the final approach course. In just a second, I'm going to say the glide path is alive, which means that the GPS is showing the safe path to descend to the runway for this approach. Because the autopilot has approach mode armed, as soon as I cross the glide path, it will start descending the airplane to fly that path. You can see it come alive right now.
Glide path is alive.
Cherokee 9070 Whiskey, radar services are terminated. Keep your code and contact tower 134.65.
Order tower 134.65, thanks for help. 70 Whiskey. Concord Tower, Cherokee 9070 Whiskey, RNAV 20.
Cherokee 9070 Whiskey, runway 20, clear for the option.
Runway 20, clear for the option. 9070 Whiskey.
Tower cleared me for the option because they know I want to go missed, and they're giving me the option to land, go missed, or do a couple of other things. But I'm going to go missed, which simulates what you'd have to do if you got to the minimums and didn't see the runway.
Okay, what is Stanley's? Oh, we're an IFC. We might get to count this. I think we will get to count this.
To count this, I'd have to be in actual conditions when I cross the final approach fix. For this approach, that's a point called GLIS. So if I'm still in or above the clouds when I cross GLIS, I can log this approach for currency. And at this point, it's looking really good for me to count this approach. I've now intercepted the glide path and the autopilot is trying to descend. I'm reducing power to help the airplane descend.
Hey, glide path is active. 3,000 on the mist is set. 2400 at Gliss, if I recall. Yes. Oh.
I know you can't see the runway, but I can. And I haven't crossed Gliss until...
just broke out.
now. So freaking close to being able to count it. As we finish up this approach, here's all of the things that this airplane is better at. It's faster, it climbs better, it's got an autopilot. It can carry more weight. It's safer for instrument flying, which is something I'm going to encounter more often as I travel further. All of this adds up to this airplane is much better to use for travel than Maggie, which is mostly what I want to do now.
We are looking for a minimum of 1026, so that's going to be 1040. $21.40 for 1040. 2100 for 1040. $2,000 for 1040. $1,900 for 1040. $1,840. $1,740, 700 to go. $1,640. $500 to go. $400 to go. $300 to go. $200 to go. $100. That's minimums.
Now that I'm at minimums, I go full power and press the toga button, which stands for Takeoff Go Around. It commands the autopilot to climb with wings level.
Concord Tower, Cherokee 9070, Whiskey's going miss.
And Cherokee 9070 Whiskey, roger, and fly heading 150, climb maintain 3000, and contact Charlotte on 128.32.
150, climb maintain 3000, and 128.32, thanks for your help, 70 Whiskey.
Once that's established, I can reconfigure the AP to do what I need it to do. In this case, climb to 3000 and fly heading 150. And this is where the introduction to my new airplane ends. I really like the functionality in this airplane, and overall this is a much better airplane than Maggie. I still miss Maggie and hope that the student pilot I sold her to treats her well. Anyway, thanks for watching. Talk to you again.